thank you so much for coming today, and I am delighted, beyond delighted, to welcome you to Trauma-Informed Education, Passing Craze, or is this best practice? And how might we look at this in our third level capacity? And with us today is Dr. Catriona O'Toole. She is a chartered psychologist and assistant professor in Maynooth University Department of Education. She's won awards for her work on school well-being and trauma-informed practice in schools, also mindfulness, compassion, and education. These are her specialties. Her work also explores how education can contribute to the larger human flourishing, and to the creation of a peaceful and equitable world. She's also collaborating with Alcohol Action Ireland, and she is on the Irish Research Council funded project to build capacity and develop a framework for school-based trauma-informed practice here in Ireland. In addition, she collaborates with a team of international researchers and scholars on the initiative that's a UNESCO initiative, the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Peace and Sustainable Development, and that project is called Futures of Education. She is the Maynooth University representative for on the Kildare Child and Young People's Service Committee, which is the CYPSC. She also is convener of Health and Wellbeing Education Network, a network of the European Education Research Association. So please join me in welcoming the wonderful Katrina, and I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thanks for inviting me. And just to say thank you for initiating this discussion and conversation, because yeah, I think it's important, and I don't think it's happening all over the country or in other universities or higher education institutions. So well done on getting the conversation started.
Well, I think
let's see what happens.
Yeah, because I was saying to you when we were talking about this, do you, you know, what's going on in Maynooth around this space? You said nothing at the moment, and I said, do you want to blaze a trail? And you're like, yes, I do. So here we are. These are the people in
I shouldn't say completely nothing. We are, you know, there are some conversations happening, but we'll see. I think it's very new area for. Even for, you know, I work in an education department, so I'm working a lot with teachers, and I suppose even in primary and secondary schools, this is a new area. A lot of teachers are only beginning to hear about trauma-informed practice in education now, and it's a new area across other sectors as well. So, and certainly new for higher education. So, you know, I suppose I'm interested to see where the conversation goes. Is it something that people kind of see a benefit in becoming more trauma aware, trauma informed? And if it's the case for other sectors, then why would higher education be any different? So I suppose what I thought I would do is present a bit of a background, give a sense of what we mean by trauma and adversity, the prevalence, and how it can impact mind, body, and behavior, and then kind of moving into trauma-informed practice and what that might look like in higher education. Does that sound like an okay plan?
That sounds wonderful.
Okay, super, Rebecca.
I've just made you the host, so you can share the screen if you like. Brilliant.
I'll share my screen now. And can I just get a sense of, so everybody here is from IADT, and do we have like, no?
I think we have a lot of people that aren't, or maybe.
Okay.
So do you want to have people introduce themselves? I mean, yeah, I mean.
I'd love that actually. Do we, could we do that? I think we have, you know, maybe even just to say, introduce yourself, where you're from, or, you know, I'm kind of, are people in academic roles or student support services? I can think, just love to kind of have a sense of what people are doing. Well, I just go out, Rachel, if I could start with you, so I put you on the spot, but just
no worries at all.
That's super.
Yeah, my name's Rachel Sarser-Ryan. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Deputy President and Education Officer in IADT Students Union.
Okay, lovely to meet you. And Emma?
Hi, yeah, my name's Emma. I work in LIT, or well, TUS now, as we've just become. I'm a lecturer in social care, and I've actually just started a doctorate in higher education in Maynooth, actually. And my area that I'm really interested in is trauma-informed education and trauma-informed pedagogy for, I suppose I'm looking at the moment specifically around social care workers and the education of social care workers, but also more broadly speaking as a whole. So I've been really kind of aware of you and your work, so I may be hounding you at some point.
Oh, okay, yeah, no problem. It's lovely to meet you. Thank you so much. Louise.
Hi everyone. I hope it's okay. I'm going to keep my camera off. My internet is a bit dicey since this morning. So I work in UCD. I'm part of the new Dignity and Respect Support Service. So I'm just there in that role for the past 3 weeks. So it's quite new. The service was developed, I suppose, off the back of a very kind of in-depth review of their bullying, harassment, and sexual misconduct policies as well. So I have a general interest kind of in this area myself. So this is more to inform me the session today in discussion. And previously I worked in EDI in Trinity on Athena Swan. So yeah.
Lovely. Thanks, Louise. Tina, if you're able to come on.
Yeah,
your mic.
Turn your mic back on there, Tina, or I can. She may have stepped away. We go to Therese?
No problem. Maybe, yeah.
Hi, Therese Moylan here. I'm the head of the Department of Entrepreneurship here in IADT, and I mean, this is something we've had certainly informal chats about, but we haven't probably. And I suppose from where I'm coming from, I'm very conscious of how you sensitively deal with this in a curriculum, and conscious of maybe what that raises for the staff as well as students. Yeah, so just really interested in learning a bit more.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Teresa. Leanne?
Hi, Leanne Rooney. My pronouns are she and her. I work at NCAD. I'm the Equality Project Officer, and I work on Athena Swan and also on the consent framework. So this kind of ties really nicely into both of those.
I think so. Thanks, Leanne. And Rachel? Oh no, sorry, we saw you, Rachel. Sorry about that. You're moving around on the screen. Kay, I don't know if I pronounced your name right.
It's Kai. Can you hear me? Right?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Sorry for not having my camera in with me today, but I'm the VP for Welfare and Equality for IGT Students Union. So this very much ties into my role and what I do for students. So.
Okay, thanks, Kai. And Emer?
Yeah.
Hi, apologies also for not being able to have my camera on. I am the Sexual Violence Framework Project Manager at UCC. So I'm interested in this for all sorts of reasons, you know, in terms of trauma-informed care and practice, in terms of professional services, but also as well in terms of embedding it within the curriculum also. So thank you.
Thanks, Emer. And Catherine.
Catherine Ann, sorry, just asked me to speak on her behalf. I work with Catherine Ann as well, and she's also doing her, I think in year 3 or 4 of her doctorate in Maynooth, and she's very interested in the role of care in education and kind of caring educators, and I know is doing a lot of work in that area. So it very much ties into this. So she was the one who let me know that today was on. So hopefully I represented her well. But
thank you. Okay, yeah. Nice to have you here, Catherine.
I think Tina might be back. Sorry.
Sorry.
I think Tina might be back if she wants to pop her mic on. Well, we'll go to Larissa. Actually, while we're stopped, I actually didn't introduce myself, which is kind of crazy. My name is Rebecca Roper, and I'm the head of teaching and learning here in IDT. I also am the lead on the RPL project with Thea, which is part of the Human Capital Pillar 3 funded project. And I also have the pleasure of I've been a lecturer here for 25 years, and I've just moved into this role over the last 2 months. It's been amazing. I'm really enjoying it, but it has been a big change. So, and I also work with I'm on the Athena Swan group here in IDT, and Claire McGing, who couldn't be here today, but she wants to send everyone her very best. She had recommended we speak to Katrina about this because it's something that I think it's important. I need to unmute Tina, is what she's telling me.
Yeah.
Chat. Does that mean chat? No. It's more chat pin. I don't know that I can, sweetheart. I think if you push your own button there.
It's the host needs to unmute.
Oh
Tina.
my goodness, that's me then now, isn't it?
Oh, that's the problem.
I wonder
Sorry.
how I do that.
Here, I'll do it. I can take it back. Maybe. Can I take it back?
Okay.
Give it back to me. Larissa, maybe you'll go in the interim if you're about.
Hi, Larissa. It's nice to see you again.
Very nice to see you too, Katrina. Thank you so much.
I haven't seen you in so long. Yeah, hi.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Katrina was the head of the master's program in Maynooth at the time when I did my master's in education. And thank you so much. I didn't know much what to expect from this event, to be honest, and I will have to leave my camera off. But I suppose, to be honest, my interest in this event was on a personal basis. Katrina, you hosted a big event recently on trauma-informed education, and it made me think about my experience in higher education and how my personal trauma came out. Yeah, so it's been a journey since for me to try to untangle and to understand myself and my experience with my with higher education. And yeah, so I'm very curious to see what you have to say about that. Thank you.
And finally.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, Tina.
Yes. Hi, Tina. This is Tina. Sorry about all the confusion. I'm just actually completely unable to mute or unmute myself unless I am asked to do so by the host. So that's what's gone on there. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Tina Kinsler. I'm head of Department of Design and Visual Arts in IADT, but I've worked across most of third level institutions in Dublin. My interest would be very similar to Therese as a head of department. I think this kind of any kind of progressive insight that we can have on the development of our curricula going forward is really welcome. But I have a personal interest also that my PhD research was on the matrixyal theory of Bracker-Essinger, which is a very kind of emerging area of psychoanalysis. And in my own research and writing, I look at lots of crossovers between trauma, affect, and artistic practice. So that's my reason for being here today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Thanks so much. Sorry, that's the dog saying hello. I think probably somebody needs to mute me again, I'm afraid.
Oh, it's okay, I will.
Oh, it's okay, I will.
I hate to.
So thanks, Tina. I think we haven't heard from maybe Francis and Roderick.
And yeah.
Francis.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm a psychotherapist and I'm working with families and children. And of late, I have been going into schools. I've been asked to come into schools to give seminars to teachers on what trauma looks like. And so what I am finding is that children with very high anxiety or, you know, they end up running out of schools in the primary school. I've had 3 cases there recently where all kids, you know, when the stress gets too much for them, they just leg it out and the guards are called. Yeah, and so it's because of this, yeah, and through an educational psychologist, I'm being brought in and asked to explain to them what the polyvagal theory looks like in children, you know, and what measures they can do and how to work with kids. And then the kids are being sent to me on a private basis. Okay. So my interest really would be very much in bringing the trauma informed information into schools and working with teachers and pupils.
Brilliant. Yeah, really important. Thanks, Francis. Okay.
Joan Broderick, I think, is there as well.
Broderick, yeah. And if you could make me host again, Rebecca, just while we're...
Hi, sorry, I was eating something, so I had to video myself. I am Joan. I work in the health centre in IADT. I worked in the education sector, oh God, most of my career as a nurse in second level and then into third level. And I suppose my interest would be in, oftentimes students might come to us in health and disclose what the effect of maybe a lecture had on them, or it brought up different things for them. So I'm just coming in from that perspective. And it's really good to be here. Thanks.
Okay, so it's so lovely to meet you all and hear from you all. That was actually really nice to do that. I'm going to share my screen then, and I'm not sure which one I should share, but let's go with this one first and see what happens. Let's get away. Why is that up there? Okay, let me just see if this comes on. Okay, I think, can you see my full slide now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, super. That's great. Okay. So thank you, Rebecca, for the title, Trauma-Informed Practice in Higher Education, Passing Craze or Best Practice. So what I thought I'd do, as I said, is just maybe talk a little bit about what we mean by trauma and adversity. So traumatic events, maybe some of the things that you see coming up here. So abuse, neglect, bullying, being taken into care, experiencing war or displacement, trafficking, but also, you know, coming in there as well, inequality, social injustices, discrimination, and so on. So quite a broad, I'm kind of taking quite a broad definition maybe of trauma. But Gabor Mate would say that trauma is not the events, it's not the external events, it's not what happened to us, but it's what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. So it's the stress, the body's response, and the patterns of response around that. So it refers, I suppose, to the experience or pattern of experiences that result from adversity. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but just to introduce you maybe to this is quite a seminal study, and it has given rise to a lot of research and a lot of research and practice in this area. So some of you will be familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. It was a study conducted in the United States in the 1990s, and it basically, they categorized 10 different types of adversity, which you see here in the graphic. So physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, emotional or physical, and household, what they call household dysfunction, I call trauma in the child's family or a family home. So mental illness of a parent, mother treated violently, so it's domestic violence, family breakdown, substance abuse within the family home, and an incarcerated family member. So just taking those 10 categories of adversity, they asked participants, 17,000, mostly middle class, white middle class participants, how many of those adverse events they had experienced. How many do people, like you can put in the chat if you want, but you know, what percentage of people would have experienced one or more of those type of events? It's just maybe even to think about it for yourself for a second. So examining the life histories, they found that at least about 2/3 of people had experienced at least one of these adverse childhood experiences. About 12% had experienced 4 or more, and these were a fairly middle class sample. These findings then have been replicated across other countries and contexts. And I suppose we know as well where there's consistent poverty or marginalization, that the likelihood of these kind of adversities is considerably higher. So we also know, so it's prevalent, that's the first thing, and we also know that experiencing adversity in childhood is strongly linked to a wide range of negative psychological health and educational outcomes over the life course. So, which is what you can see in that graphic. The risk for negative outcomes across health, risk behavior, life potential in terms of education, employment, etc., goes up the more adversity that we have experienced. So that prompts many experts across the world to highlight that childhood adversity is actually considered a global health epidemic, and it needs to be addressed as part of global public health agenda. So it is considered an epidemic, but quite a hidden epidemic. So in the way that, you know, COVID is very real in people's lives at the moment, this is kind of under the radar a little bit. So that's very doom and gloom. We do also know an awful lot about healing and the context in which healing occurs in relationships and how important they are. So this presents maybe a very deterministic picture. So I do want to say that is, you know, we do know as much as we know about the impact of adversity in terms of health and behaviors. We also know a huge amount more now about the potential and the amazing human potential for healing and resilience. So sometimes it can be helpful to distinguish as well between single incident trauma. So for instance, a car crash or a natural disaster. These types of traumatic events are generally, they can impact us hugely, but there's generally a supportive and helpful community response. There's no societal blaming of victims typically. And that contrasts with maybe complex relational trauma, which is important to highlight because it's much more common than single incident trauma. It involves interpersonal threat, violence, violation, the fundamental betrayal of trust in primary relationships, because it's usually perpetrated by somebody who's known to the victim. So we know that children are actually more at risk within their own home by people that they know, rather than the whole stranger danger issue. So, but around complex relational trauma, victims nearly always experience stigma and a sense of shame, a sense of guilt, a sense of self-blame. Community responses typically are not helpful. They're very disempowering, and they can be add further shame and blame as well. And we know that this is much more prevalent and tends to, because it's embedded in relationships, it has more far-reaching impacts on children's emotional and physical health outcomes. Also important to mention another collective, interpersonal and intergenerational historical trauma. So this would be things like, you know, the historical abuses. So we're talking a lot about mother and baby homes at the moment. The type of also trauma and oppression by particular groups in society, like for instance, the traveller community in Ireland. So the causes, I suppose, of community trauma lie in historic and ongoing social inequalities, including poverty, racism, sexism, oppression, and other imbalances of power. So really important that we broaden out our concept of trauma to include trauma that's experienced collectively by community members, and oftentimes a harm can be passed down intergenerationally. So how trauma impacts adult learners, we might see, so in university, higher education setting, we might see emotional responses. So if you're severe emotional or psychological distress, mental health difficulties, it can also impact on learning. So in terms of executive functioning, those higher order cognitive processes, you might see memory impairments, difficulty regulating or sustaining attention, difficulty with processing information. We might see health issues, health risk behaviors, over or under eating, using drugs or alcohol to self-regulate. We might see physical health issues. And it can impact obviously on relationships. So maybe difficulty in social situations, difficulty with peers or in setting of group work or group activities, general maybe distrust of others because life experiences has taught people to be distrustful, hypervigilance or unhealthy boundaries. So that's something that we might see within our higher education context. Maybe, Francis, I know you mentioned the polyvagal theory and the fight, flight, freeze response of the human nervous system. It can be helpful, I suppose. So I might just spend a slide or two just to kind of illustrate, what's going on in the mind and body when people experience trauma, and how this can be re-triggered in the present. So sorry, I'll just bring this up. So polyvagal theory, as Francis mentioned, describes how the autonomic nervous system initiates 3 different modes of responses. So what you can see here is the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So in the red, the sympathetic nervous system. This is triggered when we have a stress response. So a cascade of biological changes occur. So, the adrenal glands release adrenaline, which travels through the bloodstream, preparing the body, I suppose, to run or fight for your life. So the airways, the lungs relax to maximize breathing, the heart pounds, sending blood flowing through to the muscles to enable running or escape. Simultaneously, low priority kind of functions like digestion or reproduction kind of shut down, and natural painkillers like dopamine are released. So that's the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is what, when we're feeling, it brings us down and helps us settle and reorganize from an activated state. And it's the kind of, hopefully, the state most of us are in most of the time. It's when we're feeling safe and we can be open and curious and engaged with others, engaged in the social world, and we have normal body functioning. So that's sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. But what Stephen Porges highlighted, the sympathetic nervous system, as you can see there, it governs our fight, flight response. What about the freeze response? And Stephen Porges' work was really important in this area. He highlighted basically that the parasympathetic nervous system actually has 2 branches, the ventral and the dorsal. And in extremely threatening situations, the dorsal branch can actually trigger a shutdown or a freeze response. And this was really important for trauma survivors because it highlighted, I suppose, what trauma survivors were often kind of had this kind of sense of self-blame. Why didn't I run? Why didn't I protect myself? Why didn't I fight back? And actually, when Stephen Porges described this work, it was just like, oh, that's, now this I get. This is what I experienced in that situation and under extreme threat. And it highlights animals do this too. Animals in the wild, when there is no escape, they shut down. And it's like nature's final act of mercy kind of thing. So we do know that the freeze response is very real. Unfortunately, survivors are often still shamed and blamed for not putting up a fight, for having no defensive rooms. We see and we hear this in courtrooms across the country still. So this graph here just shows our arousal increases. So most of us are kind of here most of the time, hopefully. And so we're mostly in this parasympathetic mode of, we can be open and engaged and curious and mindful and experience, we have a sense of groundedness. But, little irritations and frustrations, our arousal level increases, we're into the parasympathetic system. But as Porges said, when, we can move up this into kind of rage and panic and so on, and this is a really sense of, we're activated to fight or flight. But up here is the freeze response. And when the threat is quite high, we can go into kind of shutdown, dissociation, if you're familiar with that term, a sense of kind of numbness. So if you're looking at it's a student in a classroom might just look blanked out, they're zoned out, if you like. So what has all that got to do? I won't go into the brain model, but I suppose when something reminds a traumatized person of the past, the brain body kind of reacts as if it were happening in the present. And just to give it by way of illustration, this is not a traumatic memory per se, but I do remember when my mom passed away 20 years ago of cancer, and I do remember when we had her wake at home, there was lots of flowers, and there was just that real smell of flowers in the house. Walking past flowers, it must have been some months later. I was back. I lived in Holland at the time. I was walking past flowers, and suddenly that scent of lilies just flooded me, and I was back there, bang! Like it was just like, oh, my mind body was reacting as if I was back there at that time. It was just a very bodily reaction. It's not a conscious response, but a very bodily response. And so sometimes that's what happens with a trigger, something being re-triggered. So in normal circumstances, we can easily move beyond, people respond to danger with temporary increase in stress hormone, and we quickly return to baseline. People who've experienced trauma will be much more easily triggered. So they're more easily go into that fight or flight, or even into that freeze response. So they tend to have what Daniel Siegel called a narrow window of tolerance. So they more easily become dysregulated, moving into fight or flight, or moving into a freeze response. For an educator, it may seem that they respond disproportionately to mildly stressful stimuli. It may take their bodies longer to return to baseline. For others, particularly around dissociation, freeze response, they may block out conscious memory of events. It may seem in the classroom, if they're triggered, that they're zoning out. The conscious mind blocks out memory or blocks out those messages of that of the emotional brain and body. But physical responses can still carry on unabated, so they're still having that stress response. So of course, it's not possible for educators in higher even in our schools and classrooms. It's not usually possible for educators to know which students are impacted by trauma. Sometimes, teachers will know that, but oftentimes they don't. So it's not possible for us to always know which students in our class have experienced trauma or how it has impacted them. I mean, we can be aware for sure, of different cohorts, and maybe what their experience may have been like, but we don't necessarily know, and we have to be open to that. But what we can do is be aware of the values and principles of trauma-informed practice, and they can be hugely helpful. So I'll just highlight them here. So this is coming from originally Harris and Fallett, and then SAMHSA in the United States. So these are the six core principles and values of trauma-informed practice. So the more we can do, I suppose, to create a sense of safety in our classrooms or in our on-campus life. And by safety, I mean like physical safety, but also psychological, emotional safety. The more that we can build trust and be that trustworthy person, be transparent, creates opportunities for peer support, collaborate. So rather than telling students what's going to happen, is it possible to collaborate with them? Can they input on our courses, on our assessment modes, etc.? Can we give students more choice and voice, and empower them within our within our classrooms and on campus, and having that real respect, cultural humility, and respect for diversity. So trauma-informed practice is about building knowledge, I suppose, of trauma, how it impacts mind, body, and behavior, responding by integrating knowledge of trauma into policies and practices. It also incorporates that kind of self-care for educators. So just knowing that we need to protect ourselves, we need to nurture ourselves, because it can be difficult, this work. Ultimately, and I kind of highlight this, that trauma-informed practice should be healing and it should be liberating. Sometimes we see trauma-informed practices just being a tick box exercise, and that's not how it's it's intended to be. So it is intended as something that's liberating. Those principles, respect for diversity, cultural humility, choice, voice, empowerment, these are inherently liberating and healing principles. So what might that, I have that there just as a resource, which people can have some list of resources, but what might it look like, I suppose, in a higher education classroom environment? And, you know, how can we, I suppose, think about those principles and practices within our own work? It's highlighted that, you know, classroom safety is a precondition for curiosity, for, you know, being playful, for venturing, for learning, for self-discovery, etc. So we do really want to create an environment of where there's a felt sense of safety in the classroom. Trauma survivors often experience the world and people as unsafe. Life has taught them to do so. So physical and emotional safety is really a prime consideration. But I suppose it's not possible to guarantee that the learning space will always be truly safe for all students all of the time. I think it's something that we strive for and should be, you know, really have at the forefront of our minds. But sometimes I think, depending on our courses, on our modules, we want to provoke, we want to unsettle. And so in this slide, I just kind of highlight some of those maybe pedagogies that can sometimes be very unsettling. Sometimes our pedagogical approaches are designed to unsettle taken for granted assumptions. They may draw attention to power and privilege. And that can be unsettling in and of itself. They may provoke us to think about our own power, you know, our own privilege. That can be discomforting. It may bring up a sense of kind of the cognitive, something that we'd call cognitive dissonance, where, you know, our students actually come face to face with their own stereotypes or biases, and suddenly, you know, they question their identity, etc. So some of our pedagogical approaches, contemplative pedagogy is a first person, you know, requires that first person engagement. So it's very personal engagement with course content. So we're thinking about how this affects me personally, something that I'm really interested in. Critical pedagogy, Bell Hooks Freire, Beth Barilla, pedagogy of vulnerability, pedagogy of discomfort. These are all approaches that, like, actually kind of put, you know, they bring up emotions in the higher education classroom context. It's not that we should avoid that, but I think we do need to think about how we do it. So some suggestions might be to maybe clarify expectations with students in advance, around, sorry, just check for time. So around kind of participation and attendance, clarify the nature of experiential activities. So I would often include experiential self-reflective exercises. So maybe highlighting that at the outset. Something I try to do more and more is actually making reading lists and course resources available to students early. Maybe can they work with them independently if the self-reflective or the course, you know, the exercises are too much for them at that time. Doing regular check-ins, acknowledging and normalizing difficult feelings. I think really important to empower students, so demonstrate respect for their limits so that they make choices about what they can participate in and what they need to actually say no to. So you know, we need to have some flexibility around that and really empower students to take responsibility for their own well-being. How we model behaviors that we want to see in the classroom, I think is really important. So, you know, our own compassion for our students and for ourselves, the respect for diversity, humility, etc. Avoid dismissing or minimizing student concerns, responding promptly to any threats or ridicule or displays of power by students, because and while that might be a student who has had experienced trauma in the past, we also want to make sure the space is safe. So responding promptly, decisively, but also compassionately to students where there is issues that come up in the class context. We want, as much as possible, to create safe spaces for students to be engaged in kind of dialogue and self-discovery. In terms of curriculum content, and I know some of you have raised issues around curriculum content, and so our course content has the potential to cause distress. My course content definitely has the potential to cause distress, because I teach about trauma-informed practice to teachers and to educators and in initial teacher education. I also teach psychology, and I teach adolescent development, and I'll teach about parenting sometimes, and it raises stuff for, you know, students inevitably related to their own, even if I didn't prompt them to, they inevitably related to their own life experience. So I think we shouldn't, it's not about censoring ideas for fear that students may get upset, but that doesn't mean anything goes at the same time. So we'll come to that. But I think we recognize, firstly, that, you know, this is kind of sensitive content. It has the potential to cause distress, but also, really importantly, it has the potential to, you know, to lead to personal growth and resolution. And students can, you know, I hear this a lot from students, that they can feel validated while engaging with the content. They can feel like it validates their experience, like they're not alone, that others may have experienced this too, etc. On the other side, sometimes students don't. They can be triggered by the content, and so really important that there's ways to navigate that. So, I mean, what we can do, and I think what we should be doing as reflective educators, is, I suppose, reviewing our content for appropriateness, and to ensure that it's, you know, is it necessary to cover this material to achieve learning outcomes? So we're reviewing it in relation to our learning outcomes. That's that piece of curriculum alignment, I suppose. For me, yeah, I need to ensure that self-reflective exercises, experiential activities, are for teaching and learning purposes and not for therapeutic purposes. Can we try, you know, that idea of introducing difficult content gradually, having, so that it's not too intense. There's moments of humor as well, there's moments of lightness, while there's also potentially distressing content too. So we can kind of move between those. I would always, in my courses, actually signpost student counselling service, just as a kind of matter of, you know, quite, you know, just at the outset. So this is the course content that we'll be covering, highlighting course content at the outset, and signposting to the, you know, our Maynooth University student counselling services or other supports, and that they are there for students if they need them. That sometimes the course can raise, you know, so just being validating that for students, and just letting them know that sometimes the course can raise issues, or can, you know, bring up memories, or you know, distressing thoughts or feelings for students. And seek and respond to student feedback. So how are they, I suppose what we want to be doing is engaging with students. How are they responding? How is our curriculum landing with them? And how can we be, how can we take their feedback on board? So, and I'm conscious of time, so I'll just maybe, this is just a little self-reflection for educators. It comes from that lovely resource, Griffith University in Australia. So, you know, just reflecting on, you know, is this the best way? So having that alignment, I think, between kind of course objectives, what we're hoping students learn, and actually what we do in the classroom, and then also our assessment practices, which I'll come to now. So I think assessment is obviously inherently stressful. We don't, you know, it's challenging at the best of times to be assessed and evaluated. And certainly students with a history of trauma may feel threatened or panicked by certain assignments. So again, considering that course alignment, what assessment types are necessary to achieve certain learning outcomes. I kind of like the principles and values of universal instructional design. So, you know, there may be multiple ways of meeting a learning outcome. Can we have some choice and flexibility? So maybe a student engages in group work or does a group assignment, maybe they do a presentation, maybe do an essay-based task, or whatever the case may be. I've sometimes had students who've opted out. I was doing a set an assignment. We were looking at kind of mental health with an undergraduate group. They were initial teacher educators. And I set an assignment around mental health. There was a student there who I was aware of because of our access information, or disability information. So I kind of would have said, you know, to the group as a whole, if there's any issue with any of this, with the assignment, just come to me. So we had an alternative. I had an alternative assessment in mind, and this particular student wanted to do an alternative assessment. And again, that was just personally for him, it was important, and it was important for him to kind of take responsibility for that as well, in terms of kind of, you know, knowing where his boundary was, and that he was likely to get triggered by writing this assignment. So, so you know, that was really positive for him to be able to do that and come to me. I think autobiographical assignments, writing about personal experience, I do this because we have you know, I teach student guidance counselors. So they will be working with students in a guidance and counseling capacity. So for their assignment, I actually ask them to relate some psychological theories around adolescence to their own experience, and that will bring up stuff for them. But there are ways, I think, that we can, you know, prompts that we can include, that it's not all about, you know, referring to their personal experience per se, but actually, you know, that they're not writing hugely about this happened to this person, etc. But it's more about the learnings that we take from it, and you know, just them being sensitive to potentially sharing and oversharing information, because I suppose what we know is that students often want to impress their lecturers, and they may push the emotional boundaries to satisfy requirements or to impress their lecturer. So I suppose embedding this then within a whole campus approach. So I've focused hugely there on teaching and learning in the classroom environment, but as many of you are doing here in IADT, is starting that conversation with you know in EDI, so equality, diversity and inclusion, and embedding trauma awareness within access, and embedding it within student counselling services and support services, thinking about the physical environment, the infrastructure, that it's safe, that it's well lit, so the physical environment, but also, you know, access to blue space, green space. So we know that those can be really important and restorative. Framework for consent are where we are starting this conversation in Maynooth as well, is around, you know, the National Student Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Framework. So conversations starting there, and how we can ensure that what we are doing in response to that new national guidance is trauma informed. Again, I can share this is from Janice Corello, who's doing a lot of work in the area, you know, around the pandemic, and what we can do around that to try and create safe spaces. So these kind of key tie into those trauma-informed principles: safety, trustworthiness, transparency, collaboration, mutuality, and so on. So I can share these slides with you. But really important that we look after ourselves, and that is not just a personal responsibility. So we do have that, you know, a personal, I suppose, ethic, a personal responsibility to look after ourselves, but also our culture and our organizational culture is so important. So we need that systemic support, I think, for care, collective care and compassion and respect, and in addition to kind of that personal self-care piece. And that's kind of all I just want to kind of maybe finish up on the rewards, because, there's huge amount of, talking about the challenges, and, emotions and fraught emotions can raise a lot of issues, but also just the rewards, working with students, and teachers will tell us this hugely as well, that we've worked with, working with students who have personal experience of adversity and trauma can also be extremely rewarding, because we can actually get this vicarious kind of resilience. So we're learning a lot from our students who have experience of adversity, and this idea of compassion satisfaction. So we get a lot of meaning and just rewards in our work from witnessing student resilience and post-traumatic growth. So I kind of wanted to just finish on that and really acknowledge that important point, that this is really rewarding work as well, particularly when we're supported. So I'll finish there, and I'll try and stop sharing. There we go. And come back. Oh gosh, I've gone really way over time. So I'm sorry about that, Rebecca.
That's
do you
fine,
want to
that's fine. Yeah, no, absolutely. I thought that was just great.